From Barangaroo Studios, the ausbiz COB is the key stuff you need to know about the day in business and finance.
Well, hello, and welcome to the COB on the 14th of October. I'm Nadine Blaney, and I'm flying solo today until my special guest, Josh Gilbert from eToro, joins me in just a tick. So sit back, relax, watch or listen at your leisure, and let's get going. As we are just past 4 o'clock in Sydney, the CIBO Australia Index has closed up by 0.3%. Still watching the last trades go through the ASX, so I will revisit this at the end of this program or podcast. But right now we've got the S&P ASX 200 up by about 0.4%. So copper, iron ore, doing well today. Miners up the most in 2 weeks as we've got iron ore climbing on the Chinese stimulus, even though the likes of CBA said that market participants would likely be disappointed by some of the lack of detail that we got over the weekend coming from China. But I suppose any stimulus is still stimulus, and we've got, expectations for further details to come on the stimulus front to the end of the year. And I was speaking with Raymond Chan from Morgans about that earlier on today. He was talking about taking away from the banks, so trimming any overweight positions. And he does see some value in some of those miners, particularly with his expectation of more stimulus to come. So you can find that interview online at ausbiz.com.au, or we may put it in the COB news letter. I'm not actually sure what's in there today. But that continues to be one of the key themes. Of course, we are eyeing records here locally. One exception to the rule today, Webjet. So downgrading on, slow margins. It's not a great season in Europe, actually, which surprises me because every single person I talked to through the North American summer season was in Europe. But anyhow, we'll get across Webjet in just a tick. And as I mentioned, we've got the miners doing a lot of the heavy lifting for this market overall. We had records being set on Wall Street on Friday, so we're gearing up for yet another interesting week on markets. Let's take a look at some of those miners to see how they moved today and went from strength to strength, really. BHP up by 0.6%, Rio 1.5%, Fortescue the real standout there, and Mineral Resources. I had a good chat with John Mills from Morningstar today. He's done a whole report on the miners in light of stimulus, of course, and also with expectations for potentially the price of lithium to pick itself up off the mat. And he actually named Mineral Resources as a company that is looking like it's good value. Again, you can find that online. You can search John Mills or Morningstar or any of these companies, Mineral Resources, and it should come up for you on the website. The banks also looking pretty good. Don't forget, the banks do report out of season. Commonwealth Bank of Trading update coming mid-month, but ANZ, NAB and Westpac all report toward the beginning of the new month. Tech was one of the sectors that was a laggard. You can see there quite clearly everything from WiseTech to Xero. Technology One down by 1.4%. NextDC as well. So yeah, some pretty steep falls coming through in that space. So Zip has been hot lately, not so today, off by 2.5%. We've also got the retailers coming under a bit of pressure. A little bit more of a mixed picture here, though, clearly. Lovisa down by 2.3%, JB Hi-Fi off by 0.2%, but Premier and Harvey Norman looking pretty good, up by between 1.5% and 2%. Let's call it that. Let's get across some corporate stories, and the biggest news today, I'd say in terms of pushing the market around, was Webjet. It posted a trading update saying that underlying earnings margins for the first half are expected to be between it's margins that are coming under pressure in Europe. So keep that in mind, and it's sticking by some of its expectations going forward, but this was the second time that it's downgraded expectations, even just since its most recent AGM. So real disappointment there. Appen has completed its institutional raising. It was looking to fund some more generative AI, I guess moves. We'll see how that comes to fruition. TPG, of course, selling off some of its systems to Vocus. Shares are down by 4%. And Seek entering an exclusivity agreement to potentially purchase Xref, valuing Xref, which is a small HR software company, at around $45 million. All right, let's get to the COB. Josh Gilbert is joining us from eToro. Josh, one thing I didn't mention was why we saw some of those records on Wall Street was we've got the quarterly earnings season getting going. What did you make of the banks early out of the gates?
Yeah, hi Nadine. Yeah, absolutely. It was actually a pretty good start, to be honest, from the banks. Look, I think it was one of those when we were looking as to sort of what to expect. A few sort of maybe negatives going in. We were expecting loan growth to slow down. We expected sort of net interest margins to sort of come under a pressure a little bit, but JP came through with a surprise sort of increase in net interest income. Wells Fargo sort of saw that slip, which we expected. But I think what happened is that we actually had investors focusing on, what's going to be ahead, which is we're going to see that improvement in those net interest margins as we sort of really see the Fed's, rate cutting cycle coming through, quite sharply. I think with that 50 basis point cut, it sort of really solidified a bit of a move into, some of those financials, and it just sort of supports how well they've done this year, and that sort of supports our banks doing so well as well. So, look, better than I think we expected them to do, and that sort of was solidified in the move after as well. I think both JP and Wells Fargo moving up 4.5%. And then we've obviously got a few more names coming through this week. We've got Citigroup, Goldman, and Bank of America on sort of, the likes of Goldman and Citigroup. We may see, again, a very good result on the fact that those guys are a little bit more focused on the sort of investment banking side, on the equities market, on the trading side of things. And if we just have a look at BlackRock, they pulled in 221 billion in the quarter, which was a record number. That pushed their assets up to around about, I think it was 11 trillion. So I think that's a good lead into some of those banks that do a lot more in terms of, sort of equity markets and trading.
45th record this year, is that right, for the S&P 500? Can it continue today? I noticed that futures are under a bit of pressure.
Yeah, 45th record. Look, it's just astonishing. I think if we look back at how well the S&P 500 has done, last year and then so far this year, it is just, a market that just keeps chugging along. Look, I think a lot is going to sort of rely this week on tech. We've obviously got Netflix coming at the end of the week, but we also have some important numbers from ASML and from Taiwan Semiconductor. So that's going to give us a nice read onto sort of what to expect from chip makers. We know they've been a big driver of the market this year. Obviously, Nvidia has been a huge part of that. So I think that if we look at something like Taiwan Semiconductor, depending on what we hear from them in terms of forecasts, how sales are performing, I think that could set the tone for the week, and obviously, really push tech around, which, as we know, drives the S&P 500 at the moment. So I think that's going to be a big part of that. We also get sort of retail sales in the latter end of the week as well from the US. We hear from about 11 Fed speakers this week. We hear from President Waller today. So look, I think there's plenty of risk events sort of that could shake the market. But I think really today or tonight in the US, I should say, when we hear from President Waller, we want to hear from him whether is it going to be 25 basis points? Is it going to be that hold? Because ultimately what we've seen now is that 50 basis point cut for November completely taken off the table. So we want to understand a bit more. Is this easing cycle going to sort of really continue, or are we going to see it sort of slow down? I think our house view is that we continue to see easing, see a 25 basis point cut, but we should get a better understanding of what to expect maybe after we hear from those 11 speakers this week. Yeah,
there's a lot. They like speaking. And also I think we should mention that most U.S. markets are closed on Monday for Columbus Day. So that's the state. It's obviously very influential here. Influential here has been all the China stimulus talk. We saw a very volatile session for the Aussie dollar. But again, looking ahead to this week, we could also see some volatility around the jobs report on Friday. Correct me if I'm wrong, because, even CBA, I was just reading a note, they're expecting to see weakness to come through in the jobs market, which also could put some pressure on the Aussie.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think That's a number that for the RBA has been particularly volatile this year. It's been really sort of difficult for them, I think, to sort of gauge, in what direction we're sort of moving. Unemployment rate moves higher. We have really strong employment, additions as well. So I think both in the US and here, those sort of jobs numbers have been quite tricky to sort of get a read on. Look, I think bottom line here is that we are going to start to see weakness coming through in that jobs market over the next couple of months. But we know that migration has remained super, super high. That's continued to sort of support the labor market here. So until we really do begin to see, some easing, I think maybe it takes something like we saw in the US, where we did have that, one sort of non-farm payrolls report that came through pretty sharply. That's why we obviously then got that 50 basis point cut come through. So maybe it takes something a little bit more drastic like that to sort of change the RBA's sort of stance. Obviously, Michelle Bullock has been very, very clear that we aren't going to get a cut this year. Obviously, markets even sort of really pushing back now on that February rate cut at the start of next year as well. So yeah, I think that jobs number is going to be really important. I think probably more important is going to be that quarterly inflation number towards the end of this month. But yeah, I think if we continue to see strength in the labor market and inflation sort of remaining persistent, then I think that cut just continues to be pushed back further. And as I said, I don't think Michelle Bullock has been afraid to sort of really put her foot down and take that hawkish stance.
Companies, let's talk companies, because we have a number of production reports out this week, including one from Rio Tinto. I mean, the obvious questions are, what's the plan for Arcadium, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. Look, I think Rio's the first real big diversified miner, if you like, that has really moved into the lithium space. We've seen sort of, BHP and some of those other names really sort of not get involved with lithium too much. I think BHP has been a lot more focused on copper. Rio as well has sort of had a big sort of push for copper as well. So I think this is I was sort of saying last week, I think this feels like a little bit of a move from the lithium winter maybe into the lithium spring a little bit. Not saying that we've seen the end of this weakness, but it might signal that we might have seen maybe the worst or the bottom, if you like, for some of the struggles with lithium, particularly if we see that sort of China stimulus coming through. Obviously, again, lots of chatter around that fiscal stimulus coming through now. We get a data dump as well from China this week, so that's going to be sort of really important towards the end of the week. But I think lithium is obviously China imports the most lithium by any country in the world, so it plays a big role. So yeah, look, really what we're looking at from those production numbers is obviously how iron ore production is particularly holding up, given that we've seen quite a lot of weakness in that price. Have they lifted production there? And of course, as you say, what we're going to get from lithium in the future, and how well those mines are sort of continuing to sort of move forward, what the plans are down the track. So look, really interesting to get those updates. Really don't get a lot of financials from them around this time, but I think investors will be hoping for a few insights, and I think Rio might give us that. But I think what it does signal more broadly is that we are starting to see those big miners, Rio Tinto, BHP, Fortescue, they're sort of really opening up the checkbooks, right? We had Fortescue a couple of weeks ago investing billions into renewable energy vehicles, electric vehicles. Obviously, we had BHP looking to buy Anglo American at the start of the year as well. So look, I think focusing on growth, I think that's what we're pushing back to now. So clearly they're quite positive on commodities moving forward. And obviously, as we continue to see China come back online, rates coming back through, I definitely think there is some value lurking around in that material sector.
Well, you're not the first guy who said that to me today, so I appreciate it, and really appreciate your thorough analysis of what we can expect this week. Any thoughts on where we sit on the ASX here today as we finish this session? 8,253, let's call it, up by 0.5%.
Yeah, look, I think again, tracking sort of Wall Street from Friday, obviously a great start to the week, following those gains. Materials sort of leading us a little bit higher. Most of those miners you mentioned at the top there coming through. I thought we would get a little bit more weakness in China, to be honest, from that news. But I think what the market is instead focused on is the fact that they actually did mention fiscal stimulus. It was really one of the first times that we heard that. They didn't really give more details on it, but I think markets may be focusing on, okay, they have mentioned it, it's coming. I think what we've come to expect with China is they're not going to sort of roll everything out at once. We're going to get sort of drip fed that. And we've known that over the last couple of months. So I think investors are essentially, okay, is this China going to deliver maybe another false start, or is it actually going to be the change that we get to really improve that economy? But as I say, we get GDP numbers on Friday, expected around about 4.6%. So again, missing that sort of 5% number that they have been sort of hoping for. Look, I think a great start to the week, pushing close to record highs. There's no reason to complain, I don't think, at the moment.
No, we won't. We'll leave it there. Josh Gilbert, eToro. Have a great evening. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Nadine. Take care. Have a great week.
Thank you. All right, stock of the day was TPG Telecom. Michael Gable from Fairmont Equities and David Lane from Ord Minnett. Here's what they had to say.
Just don't think there's a decent amount of upside from here in a market full of other opportunities. And it's quite interesting to see that the share price hasn't really reacted today because the market did get sense that something was in the works. I think it was a few weeks ago, and TPG had to come out with with some clarification to the market that it was something they were interested in.
We think that overall that will improve TPG's balance sheet. They haven't clarified exactly what they will do with it. They've said it will improve their capital management. TPG does have quite a lot of debt, so I think a lot of that money will actually go down to reduce their debt and give their balance sheet a little bit more flexibility going into the future. But overall, we actually think it's a good business, and the deal is a positive one for them. So we've actually got a buy recommendation on them.
So a sell and a buy from our expert guests on the call today. I'll have to leave that one up to you to do your own research. Okay, let's get across some of the market leaders today. And Regis Resources, West African Resources, South 32, and Bellevue Gold. Nanosonics is the only one there not in the resources space, up by 4.25%. Let's flip the page and see where the laggards were. Of course, Webjet shares tumbling 34% on that first half revenue margin miss. Tabcorp, I was just discussing Tabcorp with Helen Bird. So an upcoming AGM might be a bit spicy, off by 4.5%. TPG, as we just heard about, and corporate travel management down by 3.3%. So perhaps a little bit of, reverberations from Web Travel Group's update that really did disappoint the market. Playside Studios is up by 12.5%. And I'm just checking to see if there's any news. Not that I can see. Energy Resources, they're a gold mine. You know what's going on there. And Watso Property is up by 9% today. Let's get across some of the laggards in the small to mid-cap space. And Brockman Mining, Cyclopharm on the list as well, down by 7.6%. So let's get across what we are expecting overnight. Columbus Day, we have Kashkari and Waller speaking, and consumer expectations, or inflation expectations, I should say, in the US. Pretty quiet, though, as you look across Europe. I'm not really seeing anything due in Europe. Of course, we are expecting to see an ECB cut coming later in the week. Today was quite quiet here locally, but we do get quarterly updates coming from Rio, Auckland, and Hub 24. AGMs start to kick up, Baby Bunting, IDP Education, and Telstra. Again, we've got the board at issue there. Harvey Norman and Washington H. Soul Patts trade ex-dividend, and we do get a bit of data coming from Japan as well. So let's take a look at the final finish for the local market, with the CIBO Australia Index off by 0.3%, but the S&P ASX 200 up by 0.5%, so finishing at 8,253. We still do have trade going through some of the Asian markets, a little bit of pressure coming through in Hong Kong, and of course we are keeping a very wary eye on the Middle East. The UN says that Israeli tanks have burst into a peacekeeper base, and Hezbollah drones have killed 4 people there. But look, we're watching iron ore, really giving the China stimulus a thumbs up, although the jury is still out as to what kind of detail and difference that it will make throughout the remainder of this year. That is the COB for today. That's ausbiz for today. But don't forget, we do this podcast each and every day, a couple of newsletters a day, and we are live from 9:45 on ausbiz.com.au. Hope you can join us.